So I'd love to start by just asking you all a really simple question. How many of you have tried to learn a new language before? Show of hands. Wow, that's basically all of you. How many of you have succeeded? Just a few, all right. Not quite as many. I know the feeling, I'm still working on it myself. I'm English, that's my excuse, so it's like an excuse for ignorance. But whether you have succeeded in learning a new language or you're still trying, you are not alone. Okay? There are more than 1.2 billion people learning a new language around the world. And the vast majority of them are learning just one language in particular, and it's a language spoken by everyone in this room. At least 800 million people are learning how to speak English. And many of them are doing this to get a better job and get out of poverty. And the reason for this is simple. In most countries, you can earn between 25 and 100% more just by knowing English. So 800 million people learning English. But what about the other 400 million people, right? Why are they learning a new language? Well, I ask these questions because I'm part of a team that is trying to make language education free for everyone in the world. It's called Duolingo, and we have about 300 million people using this app to teach themselves a new language 100% free. Now that means that we actually have one of the largest data sets of language learners in existence, and we have studied millions of people spanning every single country on the planet. Our researchers created this map, and it shows us the most popular languages to learn in each country around the world. And it tells us a lot of really interesting things. For example, we can see just how popular it is to learn English. And this is not just the case in developing countries, this is also the case here in the United States. So for example, the most popular language to learn in Miami is English. And this is because more than 50% of the population was born outside of the United States. So this many people learning English, based on the research we did, that's something that's a bit more expected, of course. But then we noticed something unexpected, something strange. If I zoom in here, perhaps you'll be able to see it too. Right, the data told us that the most popular language to learn in Sweden was Swedish. Sounds like a mistake, doesn't it? Swedish can't be that hard to learn, can it? So why do we think this was? Why was the most popular language to learn in Sweden Swedish? What do you think? Refugees, exactly. Sweden saw more than a 10x increase in the number of refugees seeking asylum in the country between 2015 and 2016 alone. And as they arrived, many of them began to learn to look for, they were looking for a way to learn Swedish for free on their phones. I was talking to a friend of mine about this, very educated friend, and this was when the European migrant crisis was peaking right about this time, and he said, they have phones? I said, of course they have phones. It's you if you had to run out of your house and leave your country. It's the same thing. People don't think of it as the same thing. So where did many of these refugees come from? Well, most of them actually came from Syria. As a matter of fact, there are now more registered Syrian refugees than the entire population of the city of Los Angeles. Right? So there are more than 6 million registered Syrian refugees and counting. Now this is shocking, of course, but it's really not the first time that we've heard something like this. To give an example, the UN came out with a study not so long ago that showed that more people have access to cell phones than toilets. That says something about our priorities, doesn't it? When I first heard about this, I wasn't sure whether to be impressed or ashamed. And then I was reminded that over the years, we have actually received thousands of letters and emails from people who are using technology, cell phones basically, to get themselves out of difficult situations and change their lives for the better. So here's one of them. It said, "Learning German was a necessity for me to advance in my career and broaden my options beyond Syria. Right? Living in a country torn by hideous war and daily terrible news was unbearable, but learning a new language gave me hope." This person later ended up in Germany. And we've received many thousands of letters like this one over the years, and we decided that when we found out what was going on in Sweden and in other parts of the world, we decided that simply replying to these letters and publishing our research was simply not enough. So we had to go further, literally much further, about 6,000 miles further to be exact. And we traveled from here in the United States to the Middle East to find the solution to some of these problems with education and meet some of the people that had been writing to us all of these years. So our journey began here in Gaziantep, just over the border with Syria. Show you some photos from the journey in, most of it on foot. Now, the first person to let us into his home and into his life was a man named Aleh. Now, he actually protested against the Syrian government when things started to turn bad in his country, but he was arrested during one of his protests and dragged off to jail. But as he explained to us, this was no ordinary jail. And he said that he was placed in a small cell with 50 other men, so small and so crowded that they all had to sit balled up with their knees to their chests, unable to stand up, barely able to move because there was no space around them, and unable to speak. And he said that he did not see the sky for 1 year. That's how long he was in there. Thankfully, he was released, and when he was released, the first thing he did was flee to Turkey. As soon as he got there, his priority number one was to teach himself how to speak Turkish, and he did this using simply a smartphone and free resources. Fast forward just a couple of years, and he has actually become a school teacher himself, teaching Arabic language to the Turkish children and computer programming as well, and he's doing much better, as you can see. Next up is a remarkable lady named Noor. Originally from Iraq, she fled after a car bomb exploded on the street outside her house, shattering the windows to the house and sending bullets flying in all directions. And she told us a story of fleeing with her family in her car while their house turned into a literal war zone. It was the army fighting the rebels at the time. Now, she also fled to Turkey, and she also taught herself how to speak Turkish using simply a smartphone and free resources. She now speaks more than 5 languages fluently and has become a successful software engineer in a part of the world where you unfortunately don't yet find many female software engineers. So she's really at the forefront of all of this. Her name actually has a meaning. It simply means the light, which I think is quite appropriate for her. I have just one more story for you today on this subject, and it comes from the final stop on this journey. We were granted last-minute permission to enter this place. This is Azraq refugee camp in Jordan, and it is one of the largest refugee camps in the world. This is just one small part of it. There's about 3 more just like this one in the surrounding area. See, Azraq refugee camp has a population of 37,000 refugees. And out of 37,000 refugees, about 60% of them are children. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, this is a very difficult place to gain access to. Right? It's difficult to get the permission to get in there. And even once we were inside the camp, they were very hesitant about just how much they wanted to show us. See, they didn't really understand why we had come there to see them or who we really were. And after a little while, we found out why they were so worried about us being there. It turns out that Azraq refugee camp was actually using Duolingo, the tool we made to teach thousands of refugees. This is excellent. So why would they be worried about us being there, of all people? Well, it turns out that they thought we may have actually come there to sue them for copyright infringement because they were putting our logo on the certificates that they gave to the refugees. We had to explain to them over and over again that we weren't lawyers in disguise. We were the software developers, and we were there for good reasons, and it's all fine. You can keep doing it. And they relaxed a little bit, and they introduced us to this young man. Now, this is Mahmoud. Mahmoud is 15 years old, and he has been at Azraq refugee camp since he was a small child. See, when his family fled Syria, they had to move between more than 30 different towns before they arrived at this refugee camp. So they had to flee on 30 separate occasions before they could find somewhere safe. Now, we were introduced to Mahmoud because he is just completely obsessed with two things: learning English and learning how to be a software programmer. Two things that typically go hand in hand. And we asked him what he would say if he could send a message to everyone in the United States to tell us about himself, his life, his dreams, really. It's a bit of a daunting question, but he said this. He said, "I want them to know about me that I never gave up with the war circumstances that we are in." He said, "I love to learn so that life would continue." And that's how he thinks about his education. We met many countless people on this journey, and they all seem to have one surprising thing in common. Well, they were not learning a new language to earn 25% more or to get a better job. They were learning a new language to survive, right? To triumph over impossible circumstances. See, for them, learning a new language actually represents a chance at a new life. Right? It's a chance for them to find home again. So this left us with just one final question. What do we do about all of this? What do we do with all the stories that we've discovered, all the people we've met? Well, we decided to turn the footage from this journey into a documentary for the whole world to see. The documentary is called Something Like Home, and we released it on World Refugee Day 2018. It's since been watched by more than 1 million people around the world, and it promotes the United Nations Refugee Council petition. And this is a petition from the UN that asks the governments of each country around the world to make sure that all of the refugees in their country get access to a free education. The stories I told you today are in this documentary. It's online for free, so you can see more of it there. And I made this documentary for the same reason I stand here before you today, at a digital conference talking about Syrian refugees and free language, as a reminder of something that we so often forget, especially now, and it's that every data point is actually a person, and every person has a story. And in today's highly connected world, for better or worse, and whether we all realize it or not, the stories we tell about people are going to have an impact far beyond what we could ever imagine. We saw this here. And while we won't always get to decide who gets impacted by the stories we tell, we do all get to decide how they are impacted by those stories and what stories we choose to tell as a result. Because every data point is a person, every person has a story, and we can actually do that story justice. So that's all for today. Thank you. Cheers.